I'm the executive director of the Boulder Small Business Development Center, the SBDC, and I'm the lead for the Colorado TechSource program. And that is the program that works statewide in Colorado to help science and engineering technology companies in every way that we can and in tangible ways. I'm also the lead on the FAST grant, federal, and this is acronym world here, but this one is Federal and State Technology Grant. And that is, we won the grant for Colorado this year. That's given by the SBIR program, which you've heard from this here. And what that means is that we have more funding to support small businesses and the SBIR STTR program statewide, especially science and tech firms in rural and underserved communities. So if you happen to fit that category in Colorado, let us know. We actually have some services to provide you. And if you fit that category and the greater category anywhere in the country, I know we've said it many times, but there are SBDCs all over the country. And I've already had a few requests to be connected to the technology leads in other states. And we're happy to do that. So just specifically what it means to help with SBIR, STTR, so you know that we're hands-on and this is actually very tangible, that is that we help you identify agencies, topics, market research, and we do market research and analysis. We actually do it for you and with you. We help you size market opportunities, and that feeds into your technology commercialization plan. I mean, in some ways, we're a sounding board, and I've got the brain trust that works with me. But in some ways, you're writing the plan and we're reviewing it. We're just giving you some feedback based on what a question that came up yesterday. Folks that have come before, that have experienced this, what they can share with you as someone new to the game. So I'm one of those incredibly lucky people, and I think there are several here that have talked about this, where I get up in the morning and I'm incredibly excited to go to work and get to do what I do. And it's because of the small businesses that I get to work with. We work with all types of small businesses, but right now it's the science and engineering firms that are really getting me the most jazzed. And every time I get a phone call and hear what the technology is, I'm bowled over. This is all breakthrough stuff that really could change the world. It's really a joy to do what we get to do. So I feel very, very honored to be doing this. And what I brought here today is 4 companies that are going to be talking about their path to technology. So the topic today is Technology Commercialization Panel, Stories from the Trenches. And I think we've all been in the trenches, so we know what it feels like. My experience with entrepreneurs, founders, folks that have joined startup companies and have lived through the ups and downs and roller coaster, is that we're all very candid, because we've been through the challenges and the wins. We know what it feels like, and we want to share it. So what we're going to do is be very constructive about our conversation. And I hope when we open it up in a minute that you will be as well. So Jen Gostetic said yesterday that there were an infinite number of ways to go to market. And I know I'm paraphrasing. Jen, forgive me. And the journey may be really different for every company. Our panel will definitely illustrate this. And then when we open it up, we hope that you will be able to add different sides of the prism so that we end up kind of telling a story about the whole path to commercialization, the whole go-to-market, whether you end up in the market, in the commercial market, or whether you end up having the government as your commercial customer, which has been talked about quite a bit. So I'm asking our wonderful panel of businesses to candidly share their challenges and triumphs on the path to commercialization, and then we'll open it up to all of you. Let me introduce, I'll do a really quick one, and then let everybody speak for themselves. We have Ed Barron, Vice President of Advanced Programs at Braxton Technologies, LLC. Thank you. Erica Dawson is here is the Chief Technology Officer from Endeavor, Inc. Maciek Stachura is the CTO and co-founder of Black Swift Technologies, and Black Swift has been mentioned at least one time that I heard today by NASA. And Scott Tibbetts, founder and CEO of Starsis Research and co-founder of the Center for Space Entrepreneurship, eSpace, and CEO now of Katasi, Inc. So first, welcome my panel. Okay, so to get us started, if each of you would in turn share first your own background, because I think it's totally relevant to the conversation, your role in the business, a little bit of background about your company, and then briefly describe your technology, your science, products, services, anything you think relevant. Can we start with you, Ed?
Okay, so Ed Barron from Braxton. I was in the military for 25 years before I joined Braxton 6 years ago, but I had the great fortune of being one of Braxton's first customers about 25 years ago when the company started with 3 engineers who were doing development work on large Air Force ground programs to control spacecraft and decided, hey, we can do this a better way. So they had started Braxton and, we're writing software to do spacecraft control off of desktop computers instead of what was traditionally used back then, large mainframe computers, and turn those into commercial products. So the company, we did that for at least 20 years before we started our first SBIR, before we applied for our first one. And we fluctuated between 20 and 60 people, I think, in that time before we did our first SBIR. The nice thing about the SBIR process, what we found was prior to that we were always a sub, where we would be selling commercial products to people that would use it. They take it, put their own name on it. We'd help large contractors win work. They might use this during the process, they might not. But we won our first phase 1 SBIR in December of 2014. Since then we've probably been on about 15 phase 1s. We've won 6, but we've had 3 phase 2 awards now, and our first phase 3, we're writing the proposal for the second phase 3, and we expect an RFP for our third phase 3 within the next few weeks. So for us, it gave us an opportunity to start being the prime. And it's really made my role in the company fun because, I look at myself as kind of the Lego master. We have all these SBIRs that are doing parts and pieces and trying to assembling those to be able to do bigger projects. And then when you're becoming the prime, now I can recruit and pick strategic partners, other small businesses, and even some very large businesses to come and help with those projects. So, where we were kind of stuck between the 60 and 80 point, we're now at about 230 people with EBITDA around 12 million, and we expect to double next year. So it's been extremely helpful for us to get that visibility and be able to move to a point where we're now much more of a prime and recognized as a prime.
Maciek?
Thanks. Maciek Stachura, I'm the CTO of Black Swift Technologies. So my background is I'm an aerospace engineer by training. I actually used to work in the space industry. I worked on the controls group for the Canadarm. I worked in the controls group for the Canadarm on the International Space Station. After that, I switched gears to the unmanned aircraft or drone industry. Came here to Colorado to do my PhD at CU. One of the big highlights of that was we designed and built the first ever drone to fly into a supercell thunderstorm that was spawning tornadoes. We ended up doing 60 missions into severe storms that year without losing one aircraft, which we were pretty proud of. At Black Swift, I'm the CTO, but we're still a fairly early stage company, compared to Braxton. So I kind of wear many hats. I still daily write flight software, write C code for our autopilot, all the way through, write proposals, reports to NASA. And more recently, I've been really focused on our technology roadmap and how it can fit in with the SBIR programs from NOAA and NASA. One thing I will mention, like I said, we're still not early stage, but we're still in the earlier stages. And For the SBIR process, if there's any companies out there that are more, like if you're very early stage, you're worried about getting them, the fact that you're at this meeting means you're ahead of us where we were when we wrote our first SBIR. We had been selling some autopilots at that point commercially. We Googled other sources of funding. We found the SBIR program, read the PDF, and sent an SBIR to NASA, and somehow got funded, which, we love NASA for that. So, but yeah, so you're never early enough to try to get into the SBIR program. And for us, we found, obviously, the source of revenue were great from NASA, but more importantly, it helped sort of legitimize us as a company. So, we now told people we were working with NASA, our commercial customers. It helped with that. Black Swift currently, one of our main commercial businesses is still selling autopilots to airframe manufacturers as white labeled. I think at this point, we're one of the few or only still American-made commercial autopilots. We've also started branching out more into, we now manufacture 2 different airframes, one that's focused on commercial, mostly construction and mining. We also have one that we've developed with NASA that's focused more on their science missions, science objectives. That's also been one of the technologies we've successfully commercialized through SBIR. We've also started developing our own sensors, developed a soil moisture sensor with NASA. We've developed some atmospheric sensors. So essentially, we're sort of closing the loop and doing the entire process for the industry. We even do some flight services and things like that now. And then hoping to just keep growing from there.
Thank you. Erica.
So I'm Erica Dawson. I am currently the CTO for a company up in Boulder called Endeavor. My background, I have a PhD in analytical chemistry. As in my graduate work, I did a lot of fundamental physical analytical chemistry, including a lot of spectroscopy. But when I decided to do a postdoc, I really wanted to change things up. And so I started learning the field of molecular biology because I was interested in learning about pathogen detection and how that could be applied to diagnostic assays to be used in the clinic. So where I am right now at Endeavor is I've been there about 12 years. I was employee number 6. The company was founded in 2004. I joined in 2006 as a bench scientist. I was doing experiments in the lab for some of our first SBIR-funded work. I have served in a number of capacities since then, doing assistance to technical sales, managing personnel, and now as CTO to managing the entire R&D and engineering branch, being a principal investigator on a number of our grant and contract funded work. And so that, I also manage the IP portfolio. Endeavor itself was founded, as I said, in end of 2003, beginning of 2004, by 3 former CU faculty members. Our CEO, Dr. Kathy Rowland, was actually a former tenured faculty member in the Department of Chemistry at CU. And she had developed a type of technology in her lab based on flow cytometry for counting individual virus particles going through a stream that was being hydrodynamically focused. She went to the university to try to protect that in terms of intellectual property, and the university thought that there wasn't that much of a market or that the market wasn't large enough. And so in an interesting turn of events, the university actually signed the IP over to the inventors. And that then turned into the first technology that Endeavor developed. Kathy started Endeavor, wrote an SBIR phase 1 to get the further development of that technology funded. That phase 1 was successful. The phase 2 that followed on was successful, and in the second year of that phase 2, we launched a commercial product for that. We called it the virus counter, which is not all that trademarkable, if anyone is curious. And we learned that the hard way. But so that technology really came out of that SBIR government funding. And I think it's a bit of an interesting story in terms of the university that, the tech transfer office saying, well, that's not something we really want to put our time and effort and money behind. And so that technology, we essentially developed it. But I think one of the interesting things is that we realized that what we're good at is that early stage R&D. When we started trying to sell the virus counter, we realized, you know what? We're not really all that good at selling this big, complicated piece of capital equipment. And so we actually spun that company out, a new company, to sell and service that that instrument. And then back in 2016, that company was actually acquired. And so that was sort of our first commercial success story. But it allowed Endeavor to do what we continue doing well, which is that early stage R&D.
Hi, I'm Scott Tibbetts, and I'm founder and CEO of a company called Starsys that became Space Dev and then Sierra Nevada Corporation. And I'm also co-founder of an incubator called eSpace, the Center for Space Entrepreneurship. A chemical engineer from University of Wisconsin, barely made it through. I was on probation. It looked like I was going to have to be a ski bum. Snuck through, went to Jackson Hole to be a ski bum, and lived underneath the first tram tower, taught skiing, and worked in the Sojourner as a waiter for a year and a half. And that was truly the high point of my career. Everything sort of has gone downhill since then. I'm trying to get back. I want to retire and get back to Vail or Jackson. So then I went to, I got hired to build nuclear weapons. So for 5 years I built nuclear weapons and held the power of the sun in my hand, which was an experience. But I wasn't cut out for large companies. I ultimately would self-destruct from having issues with authority. So I went and ended up starting a space company. And it was based on an invention that was made from parts from a hardware store in Boulder called McGuckins. This is a little tube filled with wax, and when you heat it, it pushes. And so we went to NASA and said, hey, maybe you could use this thing. And they said, yeah, we can. So started a company based on making little paraffin actuators, and then grew to be the world's leading supplier of motors on spacecraft. So we were about 150 people, then we became Space Dev in Sierra Nevada. So now that group of people is making Dream Chaser.
So just to give you a heads up, I've been torturing these folks that they only have a certain amount of time for every question, and they've been so good. But Scott, I'm going to turn it back to you. I'll ask the question, and you have 4 minutes this time, okay? It's hard to rein this man in, so. Okay, so we want to answer the question on this panel, what does it take? Basically, what does it take to launch and build your business, an innovative science and technology company? And then we've got some side pieces of it that each person has already heard. So if you could share with us, what did it take?
Okay, so I was very hungry to start my own company. I knew ever since I was selling lemonade at a lemonade stand, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And when I left Rocky Flats making nuclear weapons, I started working actually with a small company making water heaters. And most entrepreneurial companies come from a big problem needing a solution. You know, I got to figure out how to get rid of space junk. I got to invent something that does that. This was opposite that. This was just so cool. This little thing you could put in a cup of hot water and it would lift 20 pounds with 2 inches of stroke. It really became, this is so cool, we got to find somebody that wants it. So called up NASA, called up a lot of different people, and the folks going to Saturn on Cassini said, come on out. So came out, you know, me with my little paraffin actuator, and I'd never been a rocket scientist. I mean, I was just a ski bum. But these were really cool, fun people, and they said, if you build it, we will come. If you make this out of titanium instead of hardware store parts, we'll buy them. So spent 9 months sending pictures of this thing all over the country, and I got this call from a guy named Dick Casper at Aeroflex. He said, I want to buy 3 of them. How much do they cost? I don't know. I'll do a costing for you. Dick hung up the phone, picked up the phone to talk to the folks at JPL and said, hey, Bob, how much can I sell this for? He said, you can sell this for $5,000. I said, you're kidding me. It's not quite how I said it, but you're kidding me. He said, no, that's how much explosives cost. So I hang up the phone, I pick up the phone to Dick Casper, and I said, Dick, that'll be $16,137. Because I figured if I had significant digits, then he knew I was, costing it. Dick said, deal. And so I was in the space biz, and we went from there with one person making these. People said, can you make latches? I said, do you think we can? They said, yeah. Oh, okay. And so we started charging $50,000 for latches, then $100,000 for covers, and then bought a motor company, and then started building deployable structures as big as a baseball field, and then we built antennas, pointing mechanisms, and robot arms, and then sold the company. So went from a tube of wax, and SBRs kicked in about halfway through to really turbocharge where we went, but just wanted to be a rocket scientist and an inventor and an entrepreneur, and found a cool thing, and it all came from that.
Oh, I'm really impressed.
How was the
Okay,
performance?
so,
How'd I do?
no, you're terrific. You're under. I'll give you more time later. So I was telling Scott that in all the accelerators and incubators, we really work a lot on customer discovery. And his story is the original customer discovery because he really found out what his customer needed before he went to market or before he did anything. So, and priced it so well. So, Erica?
I just want to go on the record as saying I wish my profit margins were as high as Scott's. But, so I realized at the end of my first 2 minutes that I failed to tell you sort of where Endeavor is now. And so I think that's the best place for me to start and then sort of tell you how we got there. So as I mentioned initially, we did successfully spin out a company. That was so that we could not deal with the marketing and sales of that product, which we knew we were doing poorly. That allowed us to focus on finishing the development and commercializing 2 additional product lines, which we currently do sell and support as Endeavor proper. We have not spun that out. Those 2 product lines are called Vaxarray and Cypher One, and they are essentially for improving the characterization and the manufacturing of vaccines, and for sort of most of it's geared right now towards influenza. And as we all know, influenza vaccine has to be reformulated every year. Hopefully, most of you have gone out and gotten your vaccine already. But so we try to speed that process up. We also have an impending launch of a 3rd product line coming up in Q1 of 2019 that is in a different area. So that is to improve surveillance of influenza viruses instead of having to do full genome sequencing, which is sort of the next thing that's coming. I mean, it's already here, but it's not as widely used as it could be for that purpose. And then the last thing that I want to mention is that we successfully submitted our first it's what's called a 510K submission to the FDA to get that diagnostic assay cleared for use in the clinic. And so all of those things would not have been possible if it had not been for a variety of streams of government funding. So about half of what our company has done is funded by government grants. Mostly ours are from NIH, specifically NIAID, which is allergy and infectious disease. We have had 4 rounds of successful phase 1 and phase 2 SBIR products, and every single one of those rounds of SBIRs resulted in the commercial launch of a product. I can't say that all of them are still on the market. Some of them just didn't do well, and I think that's one of the lessons learned is you know, you have to sort of know when to cut something and stop putting resources into something that is just not thriving. And so then the other half of the money that these products have been developed with are through contracts. And so we currently have a fairly large contract through, from BARDA. I don't know who's familiar with the agency, but it's essentially Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority that does a lot of biodefense related and preparation for influenza pandemic preparedness. And so we do have a large, that's what's funded the diagnostic development and this impending product launch in 2019 to hopefully really help surveillance of influenza around the world. We also had a DARPA subcontract. We were not the prime on that, but we had a fairly large subcontract. GE was the prime on that. And that's one of the sort of unfortunate stories. Through no fault, what we think is no fault of our own, we were meeting milestones, but that project just, the funding got cut. They decided not to move forward with the next phase. And that was a really, really difficult time because in order for us to make ends meet, we had to do, you know, fairly sizable layoffs. And at the time we were a company of about 30. And I think we probably cut about 1/3 of our staff at that point. And so certainly I think that's another lesson is be ready as a small business owner or a founder of a new business. Be ready for feast and famine. And, you know, depending on the way you're funded, certainly the way Endeavor has gone, we've not taken any outside investment capital. So no angel investment money, no venture money. We've done everything with about $35 million in government funding. And that's fantastic on one side because we still have ultimate control over the company's future. But it's also very, very difficult because you are sort of beholden to the current funding climate and what is frankly sexy to fund. And so I think that's something that Endeavor, you know, really had to learn was sort of to realize that those fits and starts in terms of the funding cycle are going to happen, and you just have to be sort of prepared for that ahead of time. I think I'm going to stop there and let. Oh, there you go. We'll keep this one.
Thanks. So I'm going to focus my 4 minutes specifically on commercializing out of the NASA SBIR program because Blacksmith has some experience with that. The first thing I'll mention, the products we make, we hand off to customers with varying levels of knowledge and training in unmanned aircraft. So, going from a prototype that we can fly under, say, a NASA flight mission to something we give to somebody and that it works perfectly every time like they expect it to, unfortunately, it's quite a big step. So, we found that, the SBR program, it gets us most of the way to commercialization, but, we still have to chip in some IRAD money to get there. And I think a lot of businesses should consider that because, if this is really technology that you have in your roadmap and you really find valuable, it's got to be something that I think you're willing to invest a little bit into as well. And then in terms of commercializing under the NASA program, I think we've tried to be very selective with what SBIRs we apply for. We really want the technology to fit into our roadmap. So with that, we've had quite a lot of luck on the commercialization side because of that. I think we have now 3 or 4 products that we're actually selling to everything from just regular kind of small companies to government to other agencies. And our most recent one, we actually just got a phase 1 that they were 3 months into, and we already signed a commercial contract to deliver hardware from that phase 1 to another company that's the amount of money they're paying us is about half of phase 1. So, you can commercialize, I think, pretty early and pretty fast. And I think it's always up to the PI of any of your SBIRs to, I think, really have a focus on that, not just on the technical development. And the other thing I'll mention is the NASA technical monitors. So whenever you get an SBIR, they assign you a technical monitor. And at least the ones we've had at NASA, they're extremely valuable. These are, I would lie to say if they're more valuable than the money you get, because the money is obviously the most important. But the technical monitors, you're getting somebody with 20, 30 years of experience in your industry. We've had, our technical monitors have been, not just keep track for technical work, but they've almost been like mentors to us. They've helped us steer our technology to where they see there's value in it for both NASA and for commercial. So, anyone that hasn't applied for an SBIR, I highly encourage it because you get the money, you get that expertise from someone like NASA, and I think there's just a lot of value with that. Quick little anecdote: the first phase 1 we got is currently in a CCRPP, I think that's right, phase. So we had I think a 5 or 6 month gap between phase 2E and the CCRPP, but I wasn't sure if our technical monitor knew that we were no longer under contract, so I just kept our monthly meetings because we got so much out of them. We just kept meeting with him until the CCRPP was funded. So, like I said, it's just a great resource.
Thanks. Ed?
Yeah, so our path for commercialization is different because we really don't sell to commercial companies. That's probably been less than 1% of our business over the past 25 years. We're starting to get into that. We are part of the P&T Accelerator, I think that's been talked a little bit. Ed Case and Sharon, they're helping with that. That's really the first time we've been exposed to taking our products and looking who commercially would buy them. So, our business case so far, which has been very successful, has been built around selling to the government. We have enough people that worked on the government programs or were actual government employees like myself. So the customer discovery for us was quite easy. We knew who the customers were. We knew we were the experts. We could lead them down the path to help them get where they needed to be, whether they knew that or not. The tricky part was, competing for a contract, winning the contracts, making sure that your customer was funded. They have a lot of things that hamstring them in their processes with the funding process and all the requirements. So being able to understand all those things and making, my wife would tell me, who teaches management, you got to make the channel factor easy. You got to make it easy for them to buy them. You can't put any barriers between them and your, in the sale. So that's what we focused on. So the SBIR process, when we first started that 4 years ago, was a huge turning point for us. And being able to move from where we were, stuck always being a subcontractor, delivering specific products here and there, to being able to, assemble whole programs to deliver to the customer. And a lot of it's not, it's not earth-shattering technology. one of the biggest projects we've been doing is helping the Air Force use commercial antennas to fly their spacecraft. NASA's been doing that for decades. The Air Force has always had architectures where a program had its own dedicated antennas, and they've had a small set of ones they actually share. But it's extremely costly with their approach to do that. So the ones they share, there's about 15 of them. They've been doing it that way for 50 years. So getting them to start using commercial one, commercial guys, they're buying the same antennas. They have a much faster process. It's about a tenth of a cost. They do it for a tenth of the cost of what the Air Force would do to go get a new antenna. And by the way, the commercial space business is booming. There's, one of our antenna operators that we use is they put 40 new antennas in last year. The Air Force has had 15, give or take one or two, for 50 years. So we can open them up and provide them the ability to tap in those at cost models that's significantly less. And, we were very well aware of that based on our backgrounds and the work we'd done. And we were able to create an interface for them that allows them to use a commercial antenna and make it look like the ones they've been using for 50 years that are 20 years out of date, make it look like an old Air Force antenna and still tap into a modern commercial antenna in a very cyber secure manner, which is, probably 50% of what we have to do these days. But a lot of that was, making sure we, it had to be done in a way that didn't cost them a fortune because they haven't budgeted out 5 years for it. And you're going to touch 20 to 25 different Air Force control systems that if you force changes on them, that was going to drive hundreds to billions of dollars in cost to them. And we had to do it on a phase 2 SBIR budget. So for $750,000, you got to find a way to make it happen. So all of that was stuff we could, as a small commercial company, could do really fast by tailoring products that we've been working on for quite some time, and we had the knowledge to do it. So the fun thing is going to be to see, as we go through this accelerator, how do we take some of these things and really commercialize them and sell to a wider market? Because I truly think that's where, a company is going to make more money than trying to sell constantly into the government. That's very painful.
Okay, terrific. I'm going to have one more question, then open it up for questions, because I know I have a lot for these guys, and I think it's more fun just to have a conversation here. So, okay, so this is from a Forbes article, 2016, How to Navigate the Entrepreneurial Valley of Death, and it's been mentioned several times, the Valley of Death. It's Chris Myers, who's co-founder and CEO of Bodhi Tree. There comes a time in the life cycle of every company when it looks as though failure is right around the corner. Sometimes funding falls through, or a big product launch fails to resonate with the market. Perhaps a team member decides to move on, a key team member decides to move on. The specifics don't matter. The fact of the matter is that almost every entrepreneurial endeavor will face an existential threat at one point along its journey. And tough question, but I guess I'm asking each one of you if you could share if you faced that point and what it was like and how you solved it, because you're here. Anybody want to volunteer?
I'll do that. Usually you think of existential problems as coming from I run out of money or I don't have a customer. Ours was the opposite. We almost killed ourselves from growth, where once we acquired a motor company and we had the whole industry coming to us and saying, would you do this for us? And we did not say no to any of it. And so we were growing at 40% a year in an extraordinarily difficult business and hiring people and going from 6 million, 9 million, 11 million, 14 million, 18 million in revenues over a period of 5 years. Well, you need operating capital to do that. And we had a choice of either getting investors or getting a bank. And a bank said, we'll only charge you 6% interest. Well, the investors, if I'm growing at 40% a year, I'm essentially paying 40% interest. So I went with the cheap money. Interesting, we had about a $6 million loan with a bank here in Colorado, and all of a sudden my profit numbers started turning upside down. I wasn't making money, I was losing money. And what I didn't do is read in the contract that there was a clause that said we can call your loan if you lose profitability. So they said, we want our $6 million back. And I didn't have $6 million. And they said they wanted it in 3 months, and I had to have $1 million in 30 days to them. And I didn't believe them. And I was on vacation, and I got a call a week before, a month, saying, you don't understand, you don't give me $1 million in 5 days, I will shut your doors and take your company. So I called a friend up 2 days later and said, hey, Frank, I need $500,000. And I'll give you great terms. And he said, okay. I called up Uncle Jack and Uncle Lou and my dad and said, I need $100K, and they said, okay. And so that got the bank off my back, but now I had 3 months to come up with $5 million. And I was upside down. I couldn't function. I couldn't sleep. I just saw my company going down the toilet, and somehow was able to sort of pull it together enough to start looking for investors, and ended up in August 22nd of 2005 making a decision to merge with SpaceDev, which saved our lives and then led to all the great things that came after that. But I had a near-death experience that let me know I'm not suicidal, and I'm not an alcoholic, and I'm not prone to nervous breakdowns, because that would have done it. So that's my story.
So I just want to point out that when Frank Taylor from Sierra Nevada yesterday was talking about SpaceDev to Sierra Nevada, this is the precursor to that story. So everything kind of comes together in this conference.
So I think our experiences with the Valley of Death, I will be very honest, are still at the forefront of my mind all the time, right? While we sell commercial products, I can honestly say that I cannot support the current staff that I have on profits from commercial products alone, period. If you told me tomorrow, I would probably have an R&D staff of 2. And that's currently 12, I think, or 13. So I think for us, the Valley of Death, having done all of our funding through government grants and contracts, is maybe a little bit more traditional, right? Everyone, at least on the, I don't know as much about the aerospace and the defense side, where a lot of times the government really is your customer. I don't know a lot about that side of things, but certainly this bootstrapping method that we have utilized is difficult at times. And as I mentioned during the last round, it really requires you, I wrote down a few things, it really requires you to be ready for this expansion and contraction that is going to happen. It requires you to stay really lean all the time, right? There's never a time where I have a lot of money to do marketing and a lot of things that to me, frankly, a lot of times seem like luxury. You have to stay really lean, and most importantly for us, we are currently at 26 employees. I started with the company when we were 6. We are now, 12 years later, only 26, right? We had to realize that the growth was going to be relatively slow, and that in order to avoid turnover of employees that are absolutely mission critical to our company's function, we had to create an environment that people really like to be at, right? We created an environment, and we have really loyal employees who tell us when they're unhappy and what we can be doing better. And I think that that's something that sometimes sort of goes a little bit, under noticed, that you have to create an inclusive and an environment where people want to come to work and work hard for you every day. And so I think that's one thing that I hear from our employees is that, we have probably 80% of our R&D staff have been with us for over 10 years. And I think that's pretty rare and something that I'm really proud of as one of those initial employees who built that R&D department. People really are happy. And I think that, when you have employees that are willing to stick it through, often when those lean times come, you can be very honest with them, right? Because they sort of know that they know how the company is funded, and they sort of know that this could be coming. And so you don't make enemies when you have to lay people off or when those lean times come. But I think for me, some of the takeaways to avoid I don't think the Valley of Death is completely unavoidable, particularly if you build a business the way Endeavor has. But I think some of the takeaways for me are that you have to, if you're going to do government funding, build a strong relationship with your program officers, right? Don't just submit your SBIR, your STTR, whatever. Just don't submit it into the black box, right? Know your program officers. Talk to them about what they need, what they're looking for, what is going to be, just sort of building that relationship, I think, is really important. I think you also just have to be really willing to be wrong and change course when something's not working. I mean, for us, when we commercialized this virus counter technology, we were trying to sell it, and we were doing abysmally bad at selling our own product. And so we realized, and we said, look, we need to change the way we're doing this. And so for us, the best way to do that was to let someone else do it. And of course, we were able, because we had a strong position, an equity position in the new entity, we benefited when the product ultimately succeeded. But really, we didn't have a hand in that commercialization arm of that product. And I think really for me that those are sort of my takeaways. Know your strengths as a company, and be the company that you know you can be, and not the company that you think somehow in your entrepreneurial mind that you should be. Right? Be the company that you know that you can be. And for us, it was certainly a lesson in not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
So I think my answer is going to probably mirror a lot of what Erica just said. So we were, with our first SBIR, we were, heads down and really, really focused on making that technology perfect. We wanted to over-deliver on every part of it, which, I think is great, but we didn't. We committed very little time or resources into the commercialization piece. I think, it was a little bit of the Field of Dreams business model, If you build it, they will come. Well, we built it. We loved it. We thought it was great. Not many came. Some came, but not nearly enough. So we got to the point where all of a sudden, the phase 2 was ending. We had just enough money to pay. At that point, we kind of got down to just founders and our shop tech. So we made sure our shop tech got paid. None of the founders got paid for several months. And then it really, I think, helped us reevaluate kind of how we do business and how we approach things. And since then, we've made it sort of number one focus on all of our grants, contracts, and even commercial sales to how can we accelerate this? How can we sell more of these? We've had an SBR with NASA. We developed just a little widget for drones that we sell for $800, and we didn't think it was that big of a bit of a technology, but it's next thing we knew, we were selling lots and lots of those. So it's these are small sources of revenue, but a lot of them add up. And more importantly, we found that people buy this one little thing from us, they think it's great. Next thing they buy a much bigger system from us, more money. So it's my only recommendation is if you're in SBIR or any grant programs is just every step of the way ask yourself, hey, can we put in an extra 10% effort here and come out with a product that at least several people will buy? So that's what's been helping us, I think, more recently.
Thanks. Ed?
So for Braxton in our world, selling to the government, the valley of death is, we've gone through a phase 1, hopefully got a phase 2. They've assigned some, tech readiness level to the thing, and it's not to their level 9 that's required for operational use, and you got to try to get it into a program. There's thousands of phase 1s and phase 2s awarded every 3 months, and trying to get to where those things end up in a real program is difficult, as we all know. And then, I mentioned we've got, our third phase 3 coming up. Even that, I don't think we've crossed that valley of death, because we're still getting significant funding from the Air Force Research Lab to mature some of these technologies for them. We are getting funding in there from some of the actual program offices. It usually comes as a shared thing. But we haven't crossed where, hey, it's been an adopted standard, used operationally, it's in there. So for us, I can't give you a great success story at this point. Hopefully within the next year, some of these will reach that point where it's been operationally accepted. But we've been able to position ourselves by making everything we can available and in place. We treat all our partner companies with respect. We acknowledge their contributions. We allow our government customer to talk to all our subs directly, even if we're not in the room. We don't care about privity of subcontract. We've made everything as transparent and easy for them to adopt as we possibly can. It's certainly not treatment that we've had as when we've worked with a sub in the past. So we're trying to change some of that culture that's out there to do that. But we know they need what we've provided, And we're already seeing that happen because the antennas that they've tried to sustain now for 50 years aren't all working. And as we all know, they continue to launch more and more spacecraft, so they're well past the point they can support with just their dedicated antennas. So we get the calls from at least a segment of the population on the government side scrambling, saying, can you get this? I need it in 2 weeks. I need to use this antenna. I've got this requirement. So we're close, and we've aligned everything the best we can, and some of it's just going to be patience. But having good customers who are there to help you get through that process, because we don't get invited to all the meetings on the government side. We get invited to very few. So we've relied on our experience and try to guess what we think they need. But our customers have become one of our better marketing arms for us. We keep in touch with them. We provide them the information they need to go pitch the concepts, to get support, to get funding and stuff like that. And it's kind of what I've seen their role to be, is to make sure, hey, they're working with the contracting staff and the legal staff to make sure that contracting mod got through in a timely fashion, that you're funded and you continue to execute. And then what we try to do on our side is make sure, we don't overstaff. We have enough projects now where we can move our engineering staff around. If one project is, getting close to running out of funding, we can go put those guys somewhere so we can retain our staff. A year or two ago, when we went through a slow cycle, we had to, we let people off. And I've seen that happen a few times in the company. But we finally got to the point now where we have enough projects where we try to be good stewards of the taxpayers' funds, manage it efficiently, move the staff around, not kill our customer when he's, trying to stretch that last dollar to keep us going until that contract mod comes through or something like that. So most of it is just understanding your customer and then having a government customer, the program manager, the technical lead on their side, and stay in good contact and communication with them. You'll see the full spectrum of folks on the government side doing SBIRs. Some are, their heads down, they want to do research, and they've got a couple that they're working on. And then there's some that get it, that there's a mission out there that they need to meet, and they've identified contractors who've become good partners with them that they trust, and they're there to help us execute, and they know they can trust us as a contractor to deliver for them.
Thank you all. Thank you for letting me ask that question. All right, can we open it up to questions from the audience? We've got some folks that are willing to run up to you with a microphone.
So first, thanks. This is fantastic, and what you guys are saying is really resonating with me. One of the things I struggle with is the squirrel factor, is getting distracted, and you say, oh, this is really shiny, I'm going to go over there, and you guys are all laughing. Anyway, my question is how do you what are some of the things you do to stay focused so that you don't kind of blow what you're working on?
There's two levels to the question. One is personally, and the other one is corporately. So what I mean by that is that you get a room of entrepreneurs, you've got more ADHD people in one place and one time than you'll ever see again in your life. I mean, we're a lot of fun, but we're a little unfocused. So at a personal level, it's very important as the company grows. The ADHD creativity piece is huge for certain pieces. Look, creating vision, invention, but operations is a very different wiring. So the whole piece is to create the yin and the yang with a partnership in your leadership, because by definition, the creator is going to be somebody that's very short in the suits of paying attention to details. So getting an operations person tied to the founding CEO is key to it. Corporately, we ran into that problem of we had so many people coming to us saying, could you do robots? Could you do this? Could you do this? And we would have been much better to just kind of put blinders on and say, no, we do motors. We do deployables. But there was just too much ADHD in the company, and there's a balance. But the old stick to the knitting stuff of Tom Peters way back when, there's a lot to that. But you have to be nimble, you have to pivot, you have to recognize when you got to do something different, just like you were saying. It's a very hard balancing act.
Anybody else want to take that?
I'm not going to say much because most of what I would say would echo exactly what Scott said. It's funny because I was writing down, as it was coming out of his mouth, I am not the creative ADHD type at Endeavor, right? Our CEO and others are the idea-driven, this is what we need to do, this is gonna be the next product that I am the process-driven person. I am the 10 years ago, we need to implement a quality management system. If I'm gonna do development, I don't wanna ever have to reinvent the wheel. Let's implement this. And I think that is absolutely critical because you get too many of those creative types in a room and you spin your wheels for not just hours and hours or days and days, but months and months, right? Trying to figure out what is it that we're actually going to do. Because all of those ideas are valid and good, but you have to be able to say, sorry, that's a great idea. There is no market for it, or it's never going to make us a dime, so that you can just put it to bed and move on to something that is. So I think that's absolutely critical. Oh, I keep doing that.
That was actually great. The only thing I'll add is, especially if you're doing any proposals or anything, if whatever your engineers tell you how long something's going to take, double it.
Yes. Yeah.
And if they're real excited about doing it, quadruple it because they're trying to convince you of it. So.
Very good point.
I actually have a software engineer that anytime he gives me a deadline, I multiply it by 2.5. And it is almost perfect to the day, but that is absolutely true.
That's a good point.
You know, so I think that there's a certain amount of the, you know, shiny object thing that's good. You have to have some of that. That's where the innovation of your company comes from. But you have to have somebody who's managing the process. You know, our owner every week is watching the books, you know. What did we invoice this week? What did we spend this week? When times start to get kind of tight, he cranks down the, you know, shiny object work. Says, all right, you know, you can't do that much this week. When times, you know, when times are really healthy, he reinvests and gives us the opportunity to try different things. I mean, we write software, you know, if you look at the history of the company, probably 30% or more of the code we've written has been thrown away. And we've certainly tried things that got thrown away. But, you know, the only way you can, you know, you can be creative and, you know, come up with new stuff is that you got to try it. You got to find where's that edge. And if you never break something, you didn't know where the edge was. So, you know, you got to do some of it, but you got to watch that bottom line because if the money's not coming in and people don't want to work for free, and there aren't many of those, you can't pay people. So.
Another question? It's coming.
So we're just going to get your opinion, as maybe Erica, especially as you're looking at processes, and government may be very familiar driving one way, but for a small business or for the SBIRs or STTRs, are there some lessons learned about waterfall versus agile or other methodologies?
That's a good question. So I think, you know, it's funny because in my industry, you know, sort of the FDA regulated medical device side of things, you know, all of the guidance documents, everything are written essentially for the waterfall method, right? Like nothing says, oh, you can use an agile method. I will say that for the overall development process, we still use a somewhat waterfall method in terms of the way the project is documented. But the way that we conduct design reviews is more like an agile method. So we conduct much more frequent, less substantial, if you will, you know, smaller pieces of the project in terms of design review, because this whole reinventing the wheel thing is very difficult sometimes if you use this waterfall method and you just go, and then there's not a design review until the very end. So we've certainly adopted it for design reviews, and we absolutely have adopted an agile method for software development. So for us, sprint-based software development, where every 2 weeks you're looking at code and looking at what's been, you know, how much code has been verified and what has actually been designed in and, you know, where the software is, we definitely do that on a far more frequent basis. So for us, I think moving more towards that agile in practice, even if the documentation looks on its surface more like a waterfall approach, certainly has worked for us.
Anyone else really want to address that?
And so what I found more important is having software developers who are developing software for an application they understand. You can go hire somebody with a computer science degree and is expert in C++, but I can't get him to write good software to process spacecraft telemetry unless he understands what a spacecraft does and what the telemetry does. So if he doesn't, I have to partner him with somebody who does. So it's a good system engineer who's flown spacecraft, and the two of them can work together. Almost everything we do now is agile, 1-2 week kind of sprints, but it's with a team of people who understand what the mission is that they're trying to develop it for. And then the team has to be small. You know, you get more than 8 people on a project, then you need to break that project up into some modular piece that they can function with and then talk to somebody else through some open interface. Because if you've got 100 people trying to write software, it's too many for them to communicate across the team to deliver something that's going to work. So having small teams who are knowledgeable in what they're doing, and that's, you know, been proven extremely successful for us. So very rarely do we have more than 2 or 3 people actually developing some application.
So we only have a couple of minutes here. What we've seen here is different kind of facets of a prism of how to go to market, how to commercialize technology. We've got an acquisition, working through everything to an acquisition. We've got a spin-off and then retaining the R&D basis, foundation of the company. We've got Black Swift is commercializing constantly. And then Braxton is an example of moving toward infusion and, you know, having the government really be your customer. So I want to open it up to you folks. And if there's anybody that wants to share maybe what they're doing in their company, that's terrific. Kendall Reed.
Hello, yes, I'm Kendall Reed with Cold Quanta. We develop enabling quantum technologies. And in my past, I was the first employee at Captain Renan Labs. Both of these companies were started by professors who had brilliant ideas and decided to create a company and commercialize those ideas. And in both cases, the ideas were, of course, a little good bit before industry. They were early. That's because they were coming out of research labs. And so if you try to make an industrial product out of that, you're going to die in the valley of death long before you get to where the rest of industry wants it. And both of these companies have been very successful in starting by selling to their peers. So research groups don't want to make it out of duct tape and baling wire every time and start over with the early equipment for their research. And so we would make a more reproducible, compatible, compact, reliable version of these early equipment, sell it to the academic market. The handy thing there is we thought like our customers did because we came from the same environment. That's an early way to bootstrap, creating products, doing marketing, and then as we did that, we also were learning how to do manufacturing. So you take a bunch of academics, professors, and their graduate students. That was what I was, a graduate student who went to work for my advisor. And we learn how to leave the lab and make things over and over. And so maybe you're only making 20 for universities rather than 2,000 for industry, but you get a little bit of fabrication. You can grow your company into fab so that you're approaching the valley of death, knowing more about the structure.
Anybody else want to give a really brief example of how they commercialized your experience? Okay, right over here. I appreciate that.
Sorry, so sort of a question too, because we're dealing with this right now. So a lot of our stuff started, you probably heard me ask questions earlier today about, we started doing a lot of SBIRs, and we're now to a point, we've gotten to a point now we have a VP of operations, and we're building product, and this is primarily in aerospace and defense, so this shouldn't be too much surprise. So we're now trying to balance between taking on a cyber phase one project, or taking an order which is larger than a cyber phase one project. And we've got engineering and operations saying we should really be focused on the product development side and really trying to really focus on the operation side, increasing our margins versus going after these SBIRs. And people know if you're doing SBIRs, you know what the fees are. So we're actually at that kind of point where at least 4 times a year, because we've been on DOD and NASA, we have this internal philosophical question. So we're at that point, and like I said, I wanted to sort of ask the panel because that's where we're at right now. And there may be other people that have been doing SBIRs for 5 or more years where they're at that same point. So, I mean, I'm actually turning it into a question. Sorry.
So we only have 1 minute, so if you could do that, and then if you could have this discussion continued, that would be wonderful.
I'll take 60 seconds on it. The thing I'd stay away from is SBRs for SBR's sake. So that's something to be very cautious of. It's a heroin that you can get in trouble on, especially since you're not an SBR lifestyle company. You're headed towards being a product company. So if you look at it as there is a clear path to product for this SBIR, make sure you find the resources to put on it because it's money you shouldn't pass up on. But that still leaves you a balanced problem. It just narrows it a bit.
Thank you.
And I think kind of the way we look at it, we have engineers who want to do research. They want to be a principal investigator, so it's where we allow them to do the shiny penny thing, and we don't pay for it. We just have to manage the staff resources, and nobody ends up full-time doing a phase 1. So that becomes their part-time job.
Please join me in thanking Scott, Erica, Maciek, and Ed